What does the science actually say about this? Well, based on a massive new review, the answer might really surprise you.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at this surprising finding, then we'll peek behind the curtain at the actual science. We're going to see how exercise stacks up against therapy, try to figure out what the best workout looks like, cover why scientists are still a little cautious, and then wrap it all up with what this means for you. Sound good? Let's go.
So, first things first, let's get to the core idea. The research we're diving into suggests that when it comes to managing depression, just moving your body could be a serious contender against some of our most established treatments.
And to get why this is such a big deal, you have to understand the sheer scale of the issue. We are talking about a condition that touches the lives of hundreds of millions of people all over the globe. That makes finding new, accessible treatment options absolutely essential.
And here it is, the headline finding. This isn't just a hunch. A huge analysis is now suggesting that physical activity can ease the symptoms of depression just about as effectively as psychological therapy. That's a powerful thought, isn't it?
So where does a bold claim like that even come from? Well, it's not just from one small, isolated experiment. This comes from what's known as a Cochrane review. And in the world of medical evidence, that's basically the gold standard. It's where researchers gather up and analyze data from tons of different studies all at once.
And when I say they gathered a lot of data, I mean it. This was a massive undertaking. They didn't just look at a handful of studies, they systematically went through 73 different clinical trials.
And get this, across those 73 trials, they were looking at data from nearly 5,000 adults who had been diagnosed with depression. So the sheer scale of this review is what gives its findings so much weight.
Okay, so that brings us to the main event, right? The head-to-head matchup. How does exercise actually perform when you put it side by side with traditional treatments like therapy and medication? Okay, let's break this down. When you look at exercise versus therapy, the researchers found pretty similar improvements in symptoms, and they're moderately certain about that evidence. But now look at the next line, exercise versus medication. Again, they saw similar benefits, but, and this is a really big but, the evidence is considered lower certainty. That's a crucial distinction. It shows promise, but the quality of the evidence isn't the same across the board.
And of course, we have to talk about side effects. For exercise, the issues that did pop up were pretty uncommon and mostly things you might expect, an occasional muscle or joint injury. For antidepressants, the list is a bit different, more typical for that kind of medication. Things like fatigue or stomach issues, a very different profile.
So I know what you're probably thinking right now. Okay, great. But what do I actually do? Does it have to be a marathon every day, or is a simple walk in the park enough? Let's see what the data says about that.
All right, this gives us some really practical takeaways. First off, it looks like light to moderate intensity is the sweet spot. You don't have to absolutely kill yourself to see a benefit. Consistency also seems to be huge, with the biggest improvement seen after about 13 to 36 sessions. And this part's really interesting. Combining different activities with resistance training actually seemed more effective than just doing aerobics alone. It's also super important to see what wasn't studied here, like yoga, qigong, or stretching.
Now, as exciting as all of this is, the researchers are being very clear that we need to be a little bit cautious. Good science is always transparent about its own limitations, so let's look at why they aren't calling this a miracle cure just yet.
So here are the main reasons for that caution. A lot of those 73 trials they analyzed were actually pretty small, with fewer than 100 people. And like we just saw, the evidence when you compare it to antidepressants is still considered low certainty. And maybe most importantly, we just don't have a lot of data on the long-term impact because very few studies actually followed up with people after the treatment ended.
And this quote from the lead author, Professor Andrew Clegg, really just puts it all into perspective perfectly. He says, exercise works well for some people, but not for everyone, and finding approaches that individuals are willing and able to maintain is important. It's all about what works for the individual.
So, after looking at the findings, the comparisons, and all of the important caveats, what is the bottom line here? What's the big takeaway you should add to your own mental health toolkit?
I think it really boils down to this. While it may not replace other treatments for everyone, the evidence is strong that movement is a powerful, safe, and incredibly accessible tool in managing symptoms of depression. It is another viable, legitimate option on the table.
And that really leaves us with a final question to consider for yourself. It doesn't have to be some huge, life-altering change. Based on everything we've just seen, what's one small, manageable step towards movement that you could take, maybe even starting today? It's just something to think about.